Welcome to another in-depth webinar on the microbiome with information you'll find nowhere else. If you're pregnant or trying to become pregnant and you want the best for your baby's health, then this presentation is right for you. As the former head of medical education for a microbiome firm, and now with my own platform, I'm here to educate everyone on the benefits of a health-promoting microbiome. All my other presentations almost entirely focus on the dramatic influence that the intestinal microbiome has on your health. But there is a microbiome on and in every part of you, to include the vagina. We're going to do a brief review of vaginal health and then take a look into how the two different modes of delivery can affect the health of the infant. And lastly, we'll have a nice overview of the benefits of breastfeeding. The goal is to best inform you for the welfare of your baby. We're going to dive right in with a study of 396 women from 4 ethnic groups who underwent vaginal microbiome analysis. The bacterial communities clustered into 5 groups, as you can see here on Table 1. 4 of the groups were dominated by a Lactobacillus species, while Group 4 was not, but instead more of a diverse community. The lowest pH, the most acidic, a good thing, had a median of 4.0. was in the first group, which was dominated by Lactobacillus crispatus. Moreover, the vaginal pH of women also differed by ethnicity and was higher in Hispanic and Black women as compared with Asian and white women. Of note, studies show that L. crispatus is protective against preterm delivery, and the lack of abundance of Lactobacillus in vaginal microbiome health is a risk factor for preterm delivery. The vaginal microbiome not only can play a role in preterm delivery, but also in bacterial vaginosis, sexually transmitted infections, urinary tract infections, and yeast infections. In fact, many years ago I was trying to help a woman who had such a bad history of yeast infections that when her child was born, the baby had to be treated for thrush, which is a yeast infection of the mouth, because the vaginal microbiome was transferred to the baby during delivery. As terrible as it sounds, it drives home an important point which we'll discuss in detail later in this presentation, that of the initial microbiome inoculation during delivery and its impact on the health of the infant. Given the prevalence and risk of mortality of preterm birth and how a dysbiotic vaginal microbiome increases the risk twofold, these researchers analyzed the microbiome of 40 women during gestation and post-delivery. You can see here in Figure B that the Lactobacillus-dominated vaginal microbiomes, represented by shades of green and blue, had a near zero risk for preterm birth, whereas the more diverse microbiome, which lacked Lactobacillus dominance, as seen in pink, showed a far higher risk profile for preterm birth. If you recall from the previous slide, the similar group had the highest pH, less acidic, which is a bad thing. It reinforces the exceedingly important concept that the pH of the microbiome plays a key role in which members of a given microbiome tend to dominate. As African American women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with bacterial vaginosis and are twice as likely to experience preterm birth, the investigators compared the vaginal microbiomes based on race. The results mimic those of our previous 2 slides. Not only was Lactobacillus crispatus found to be health-promoting, they state that, quote, women colonized with L. crispatus have been shown to have a 5-fold decreased risk for developing bacterial vaginosis. The risks of bacterial vaginosis also predispose women to serious health issues, including pelvic inflammatory disease, increased risk for acquisition and transmission of HIV, and other sexually transmitted diseases. Now let's discuss an important established concept known as translocation. This simply means that bacteria are able to move from one part of the body to another. In this study here before us, the researchers looked at 2 species of bifidobacteria and showed that whether they came from the gut or the vagina, they were for all intents and purposes genetically identical. The point here is, it is possible to address the vaginal microbiome by first tackling your gut microbiome. This is best exemplified with another story of mine. A young woman of 20 years old was incredibly prescribed approximately 100 rounds of antibiotics in her short life, and accordingly prescribed another approximately 50 rounds of antifungals for her chronic yeast infections caused by excessive antibiotic use. She also had painful gastrointestinal symptoms. It took longer to help her than the average person, but after about 4 months, not only were her gut symptoms resolved, but so were her chronic yeast infections. This was done exclusively by treating her gut microbiome, which induced some degree of beneficial gut microbiome translocation to the vagina. Research has shown prenatal stress predisposes infants and children to premature birth, low birth weight, eczema, asthma, impulsivity, anxiety, ADHD, and reduced cognitive development. Here we'll look at prenatal stress as it relates to the infant microbiome. These Dutch researchers showed that prenatal stress, as measured by a variety of surveys and to include salivary cortisol, was strongly and persistently associated with the infant's microbiota composition. When they measured 9 different infant fecal samples spread over the first 110 days of life, they found that a combination of reported high maternal stress and cortisol was related to significantly higher relative abundances of bacteria within Proteobacteria, which is a phylum full of opportunistic pathogens. High stress was also significantly related to lower relative abundances of good infant bacteria. This is illustrated by the figure to the right. On the left side is the low-stress group, Hague, with more potential beneficial bacteria like Bifidobacterium in green, and fewer taxa, which could be opportunistic pathogens in red. You can see how different group B is the high-stress group. Additionally, in the study, this imbalance was correlated to more infant gastrointestinal symptoms and allergic reactions. Who determines the infant microbiome? Mom does. Now let's switch from the vaginal microbiome to mode of delivery. Ideally, a baby is born vaginally, and the vaginal microbiome is healthy and offers up a promising initial inoculation to the infant's gut microbiome. Because, as you can imagine, during delivery, the infant ingests vaginal fluid, thereby receiving bacteria which begin to prime its immune system and aid in digestion. If a baby is delivered by cesarean section, this healthy introduction to life is skipped, and there are consequences, as we'll see in the slides to come. On this slide, recent data from the CDC shows that 1/3 of infants are delivered by C-section. However, other data estimates that only 15% of births require C-section delivery to protect the health of the mother or the baby. So fully half of all C-sections are either by choice of the mother, for the convenience of scheduling for the obstetrician, or because it's a higher revenue source than is vaginal delivery. If you have a choice in mode of delivery, perhaps by the end of this presentation, you'll be educated to make the right choice. So if a C-section infant is not getting colonized by the mother's vaginal microbiome, then what bacteria are populating the gut? If we look at the figure to the right from this study, it will visually give you an idea of the differences, what's going on at such a microscopic level. As you can see illustrated in shades of blue, C-section infants had a gut microbiome that clustered around their mother's skin microbiome, whereas vaginally delivered infants, shown in pink, had one which clustered around the mother's vaginal microbiome, shown in red. A skin microbiome is not going to be helpful for the gut. In addition to skin bacteria, C-section babies are inoculated with hospital room bacteria, as shown in this Swedish study. As compared to the vaginal delivery, the C-section infants had significantly higher levels of opportunistic pathogens, bad guys, and tended to contain a greater portion of antibiotic-resistant genes compared to vaginally delivered babies. The lack of a health-promoting inoculation via C-section sets up an infant for a wide range of increased health risks, as we'll now see. In this slide to the right, you can see a number of conditions which are found to be increased in association with C-sections. And this perturbation of the microbiome can last for months or years depending on the study. Here we see from a different set of authors some of the same conditions plus some new ones, showing a significantly increased risk in C-sections. Again, this is all tying back to the proper maturation of the gut immune system, which, by the way, houses about 80 to 90% of your immune system. And in this paper, we even see significantly increased risks for all cancers and hepatoblastoma, highlighted to the right. Asthma is a concern for many, which is tied to your immune system, most of which is in and around your gut. This Danish study followed 700 children and analyzed their microbiomes at 1 week, 1 month, and 1 year post-delivery. Key opportunistic pathogens have red arrows. The authors showed that delivery by cesarean section was accompanied by marked changes in gut microbiota composition at 1 week and 1 month of age. But by 1 year of age, only minor differences persisted compared to vaginal delivery. Increased asthma risk was found in children born by cesarean section, only if their gut microbiota composition at 1 year of age still retained a cesarean section microbial signature. So this shows that even if your infant was delivered by C-section, there is hope that you can turn the microbiome around, preferably sooner than later, to reduce any risks. and the best way to do this is by exclusive breastfeeding. If a C-section delivery is necessary, according to this study, the good news is that with time, a healthy infant microbiome can be established by exclusive breastfeeding. These researchers analyzed delivery mode and feeding pattern on the infant gut microbiota from 6 weeks to 6 months post-delivery. They also assessed the relationship between infant respiratory infection susceptibility and the microbiome. At 6 weeks postpartum, the composition of the gut microbiota of C-section delivered infants differed from those of vaginally delivered infants, with increased Klebsiella, Vaginal, and Enterococcus, which are genera that house a number of opportunistic pathogens. The good news is that these researchers showed that at 6 months postpartum, these delivery mode-induced microbial shifts were restored by exclusive breastfeeding. They also found that the vaginal-associated genera were enriched in healthy infants, while the cesarean-associated genera, namely Klebsiella, were enriched in infants who suffered from respiratory infections, also shown in Figure 4. Point of note on Escherichia in Figure 4. Why is it inversely correlated with respiratory infections, implying that it's health-promoting? Escherichia is a large genus made up mostly of the species E. coli, which we've come to know as a bad actor. But it's also a part of the normal microbiota. And yes, too much Escherichia is not good in adults, but in infants, it's considered somewhat health-promoting. So what's going on here? Well, during delivery, not only is the infant exposed to the mother's vaginal microbiome, but it's also exposed to the mother's gut microbiome via fecal exposure. As unappealing as this may sound, there are currently excellent fecal microbiome transfer therapies medically available for adults. In infants, there appears to be some immunological benefit from Escherichia exposure in the infant, which diminishes over time as the microbiome matures. And yet in the adult, high levels of Escherichia are repeatedly shown to be significantly associated with disease. And curiously enough, the same is true for lactobacillus, the stuff in your probiotics. Although health-promoting in the vagina and the infant microbiome, higher levels of lactobacillus in adults are also repeatedly shown to be significantly associated with disease. So why is breastfeeding so health-promoting for the infant? A huge contributor to this answer is that it contains human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs. But what is an HMO and why is it important? On the right side of the slide, you can see a diagram of the components of breast milk. Water is the largest single component, but among the solid components, the third largest is HMOs. It's even higher than protein. HMOs are sugars bonded together, which are non-digestible to the limited enzymes in our gastrointestinal tract. However, the bacteria in our gut possesses thousands of enzymes, and some of them can access the sugars locked behind various bonds. These sugars are fuel for the bacteria in the gut, and this fuel feeds primarily good bacteria, so they can thrive and create a favorable environment. So ask yourself, why would millions of years of evolution drive the mother to consume so much energy to produce this component, which only has nutritional value to the bacteria in our guts? The gut microbiome must have paramount importance in the infant, and as you're starting to gather, it does. Bifidobacterium, like the kinds you can take in probiotics, thrive on oligosaccharides. And the good news is that cesarean-born infants who are breastfed retain a high level of bifidobacterium, highlighting the importance of breastfeeding to select for a protective gut microbiota in the infant. But how does an infant delivered by C-section get bifidobacterium into their gut? It and other beneficial bacteria find breast milk. How do they get there? No one really knows, but here's an interesting theory with data to back it up. Identical strains belonging to the genera Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, Enterococcus, and Staphylococcus have been detected in neonate feces, maternal milk, and the maternal feces, which are assumed to be transferred from mother to neonate by breastfeeding via what's called the bacterial enteromammary pathway. It is believed that bacteria may translocate from the maternal gut by components of the immune system and subsequently circulate to the lactating mammary gland via lymphatic and blood circulation. All the more reason for the mother to have a healthy gut microbiome. The quote on the left highlights that breastfeeding is so important that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. Why? Because numerous studies show breastfeeding is correlated to reduced infant mortality, lower incidence of infectious diseases, enhanced immune response, protection for infants against diarrhea, reduced risk for postnatal death, reduced long-term risk for obesity, reduced incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis, better cognitive development, better growth, and overall health outcomes. As we'll now see, throwing potentially offensive immunoreactive foreign proteins into an immature gut can have consequences. No other protein is introduced early in life than that of dairy. So if you're not breastfeeding or not doing it exclusively, then odds are you're using a dairy-based product. You should know that there are numerous studies going back many years associating dairy consumption with type 1 diabetes. That's type 1, the autoimmune version, not type 2. I'm not going to go into detail about the various protein and peptide culprits found in cow's milk, but I will say that although there is a human genetic component of type 1 diabetes, the lifestyle component plays a larger role across the board. If you look at Figure 3, the countries with the highest consumption of dairy products also have the highest rates of type 1 diabetes. In a separate Finnish study, which is the country consuming the most dairy per capita, children who consume the most milk had over 5 times the risk of developing type 1 diabetes versus the lowest consumers. So the factors at play are mode of delivery, the early introduction of an immunostimulatory dairy protein into the immature gut, the quantity and type of dairy consumed, and other factors such as enteric infection. This autoimmune response has to do with dysbiosis, inflammation, intestinal permeability, and genes. These risks are present in adults as well and manifest themselves in various ways. To summarize some of our key points, we have a nice study of China which looked at 4 variables. 62 healthy babies were followed for 2 years. They were exclusively fed breast milk or specific formulas for more than 4 months after birth. The fecal bacterial composition was tested at 40 days, 3 months, and 6 months of age. Solid foods were introduced from 4 to 6 months of age. In accordance with what we've covered, 2 genera of opportunistic pathogens, Streptococcus and Enterococcus, were much higher in cesarean-delivered babies who were given formula. At 40 days of age, the abundance of bifidobacterium was much higher in the cesarean section/breastfed group than in the C-section formula group. Even C-section breastfed infants outperformed vaginal formula-fed infants in regards to Enterococcus levels. So again, when it comes to your baby's microbiome and health, ideally, it's a vaginal delivery breastfed infant. That's just what the data is consistently telling us. And least desirable is a C-section delivery formula-fed infant. And the good news is that if your baby is delivered by C-section, the data tells us that you can get your infant's microbiome back on track with exclusive breastfeeding. Before you buy some probiotics in the hopes that they will help, visit my website and educate yourself. I have plenty of other free presentations on the microbiome, more than you ever thought were possible. Get your baby started out on the right foot in life. What's more important than that? If you still have questions or concerns following this information, feel free to schedule a consult with me on my website, themicrobiomeexpert.com. If you found this presentation informative, I have many more for free in my YouTube channel and also in the Microbiome University tab on my website, themicrobiomeexpert.com. There you can select from a wide variety of topics. And if you or a loved one are struggling with a disease/condition, I have condition-specific presentations as well, along with their microbiome protocols found within its respective tab on my website.